Hi to anyone who may be watching this. My name is Hadley, and I'm making this video to talk about the intersection between disability and fandom. This is technically for my Intro to Disability Studies class, but it's something that I'm personally very interested in. I am disabled, I'm deaf, and I have fibromyalgia, so this is an experience, this is a lived experience that I have lived my whole life. I'm also quite active in a few fandoms, and so I'm familiar with fandom culture, not all fandoms, obviously. I'm also a bit awkward on camera, and I'm using my grainy computer camera, so bear with me. And excuse me while my eyes dart away to desperately read through the script that I have. So, a brief explanation of CDS and the topic is in order. The NIH describes CDS, or Critical Disability Studies, as a view of disability as both a lived reality in which the experiences of people with disabilities are centered, in interpreting their place in the world, and as social and political definition based on societal power relations. CDS, as I said, centers the experiences and perspectives of disabled people in the study of disability issues and what happens to us. Which I personally think that that's really important, as disabled people would be most knowledgeable about the issues that we face. As for the second part of my video, fandom is, for those of you that don't know, basically a subculture composed of fans based on certain pieces of media. Some of the biggest fandoms are Marvel movies, Supernatural, Doctor Who, Good Omens, and certain bands like BTS and My Chemical Romance. I have a few topics that I want to go over, so I'll be splitting this video up into 3 sections. These sections will be on accessibility in fandom spaces and how disabled fans are treated, reactions to disabled characters and headcanons, and some negatives as well as positives I and others have noticed in disability representation in fandom media. Okay, now that I have explained everything, let's get into the actual video. Okay, so accessibility and acceptance are 2 very important topics in CDS. Accessibility is essentially when someone with a disability's needs are met through a manipulation of a current structure or a creation of a new one. It's a weirdly complicated way to explain it, but I'm pretty sure we all have a concept of what accessibility is. And acceptance is pretty basic. It's just being accepted or not being accepted. And I think we've all experienced that in our lives. I think that we've all probably been teased by someone or felt that they weren't accepted by their peers because of a certain aspect of their personality. And in a lot of fandoms, there are spaces for fans. Some examples of what I'm talking about are fan conventions, fandom meetups, fan wiki pages, fan websites that are made to blog about fandom, etc. So even online spaces can be inaccessible. Examples include fonts that screen readers can't read, as well as lack of ramps, loud flashing lights without warning, lack of subtitles, for example. That's something that I've experienced. And this can permeate any individual and any organization. And I think when a lot of people think of lack of accessibility, I think the first thing that we think of is people in wheelchairs not being able to get up ramps, but there are a lot more things that it includes, like I just mentioned. Another concept that I think a lot of people look over is lack of trigger warnings. And acceptance can be low in fandom spaces. For this video, I've found a few people who are willing to tell me about their experiences with lack of acceptance, lack of accessibility. One experience that stands out was expressed to me on social media. It was an experience when a disabled individual, who I'll call A, was shamed for cosplaying an abled character when they themselves were disabled. A was then told that there was no space for them in that fandom, in that space, and that was just because of their disability. And a few other individuals stated that they had experienced the same. Another example would have been B, who was cosplaying as a disabled character and was forced to explain the fact that they were disabled and were deserving of the opportunity to cosplay that character. This would be relatively understandable if it was asked by another disabled person who was just attempting to safeguard the spaces that disabled people have. But this was asked by a non-disabled person. It is also very common for fans online to mock each other for mental illnesses and disabilities. Mocking fans for their triggers and accessibility needs are also pretty common. And what happens when we analyze this from a critical disability studies concept? I think that we could say that these issues happen because disabled people aren't centered in society the way that we should be. And I'm not saying that disabled people should be the center of everything. We should just be centered in disability experiences and treated like actual human beings. Within CDS, there is a concept called non-person treatment, and that is where a disabled person is treated like less of a human being than an abled person. This treatment can pretty clearly be seen in the behavior of fans online. Mocking and belittling someone for their mental health or their disability is not something that you would do to someone that you view as a whole person. This treatment systematically dehumanizes those who do not align with the abled norm, which is essentially a societal norm that indicates that abled bodies and experiences are more normal than disabled experiences. This indicates that we're weird, we're not normal, we are pushed to the side. A experienced non-person treatment when they were told that they shouldn't be cosplaying because they were disabled. Another concept that I want to highlight is forced intimacy, which I think is a really interesting concept. It's defined by Mia Mingus as to refer to the common daily experience of disabled people being expected to share personal parts of ourselves to survive in an ableist world. Experiences like that of B could apply here when they had to explain their disability to justify their existence and their choice to cosplay a certain character. This may not seem like a very serious example due to the fandom context, but this type of forced intimacy is incredibly common. I have personally experienced it many times. Disabled people constantly have to justify their existence and their actions through sharing personal aspects of their life, such as when we ask for accommodations and are grilled up, down, and sideways by our schools. We shouldn't have to justify our existence in this way. And uncivil attention, as well, is a pretty interesting issue within fandom and as well as within other spaces. Uncivil attention is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's attention towards disabled people that is negative. Many fans have had issues with this where they have been mocked for wearing medical devices. This is a relatively simple concept, but it's worth mentioning. I won't be talking much about uncivil attention, but you'll see it in a lot of my discussions here, hopefully, if you're paying attention. Before I get to this next part, I think it's necessary to give you some basic definitions of things and a few fandom terms. Most importantly, I will be describing what headcanon means. That's a fandom term describing something a fan imagines about a certain character that doesn't appear on screen or on the page or in real life. I'm going to be talking about headcanons of certain characters being disabled. Alternatively, the word canon means something that does actually happen in the book. So a headcanon about Harry Potter would be that Harry has a sister. But the canon response to this would be that he doesn't in the books. It's a very basic, weird explanation of it. But Another term you'll hear in this section is delulu, which is an internet term for delusional. To be clear, when someone calls you delulu, it's not a joke, it's an insult. Some headcanons of disabled characters that I will briefly mention are Castiel from Supernatural, Diego Hargreaves from the Umbrella Academy, and Eleven from Stranger Things. Castiel and Eleven are seen as autistic, while Diego Hargreaves is seen as having dyspraxia. None of this is canon, but people have headcanons about it. I asked some fans online who they might headcanon as disabled, and found that those were the three most popular answers. I'm just mentioning this to give examples of how headcanons work. And before I talk about the rights or wrongs of disability representation and fan behavior towards headcanons, let me just give you three major examples of actually canonically disabled characters. There is Professor X from X-Men, who is a wheelchair user. There is Forrest Gump, who had both intellectual and physical disabilities. And then there's Matt Murdock, or Daredevil, who is blind from the Marvel Universe. One issue related to fan behaviors towards disabled characters is that disabled characters are often viewed in context related to inspiration porn, which is entertainment for able people at the expense of disabled people. It's not as salacious as it sounds. These characters that I mentioned before could be seen this way, but that does not mean that they are bad representations, a concept which I will discuss later. I'm not going to go much more into inspiration porn, since that's not really what I'm talking about. But since it's a relatively simple concept, you should keep that concept in mind as you continue watching this video. As for headcanons, a frequent fan response to disabled headcanons is to mock the person who has that headcanon, who believes that this might be something real, or who places themselves in the shoes of a character to make themselves feel better. I found fans online calling other fans delulu as an insult for their headcanons, which is a 2-for-1 ableism issue, in that calling someone delusional can also be ableist towards the mentally ill. And I know that a lot of people will consider this to be snowflakey, that we're nitpicking, but the way that these microaggressions happen, they slowly build up into an ableist society that does not take disabled people seriously. I just want you guys to keep that in mind, because the things that I'm mentioning are in the silly context of fandoms, but this is a real issue that spreads throughout cultures, throughout people, throughout belief systems. It's everywhere, and I think that we really need to pay attention. CDS would say here that many of these behaviors are caused by the fact that disabilities are seen as a negative thing due to the social norms I mentioned before, which I'll go into a little bit more here. Social norms change over time by location and cross-culturally. There is a CDS concept called the hegemonic ideology of normalcy, which I'll explain. Ideology means a set of politicized ideas that have formed into a system and gained power. And hegemony means to rule. So the hegemonic ideology of normalcy would simply be the ruling idea of what is normal, and what normal should be. It is what those in power viewed normal to be. Those in power would be non-disabled people. The hegemonic ideology of normalcy would lead individuals to believe that disabled people are lesser, and that disabilities are a negative thing because they are not normal. This is also an example of the aforementioned non-person treatment, which I will also go through later. So in this section, we are going to talk about representation. Just as a callback to what I talked about before, while reactions of fans to disabled people may be negative, that does not mean that they aren't good representation. Matt Murdock, especially, is quite good representation, as he uses his disability as his strength, which I will come back to later in this discussion. There are quite a few types and reasons for harmful and negative rep, which includes character types and archetypes. Archetypes are essentially recurring symbols in the media. Psychology has Jungian archetypes, but that's not really what I'm talking about here. Some disabled archetypes include villainous disability, where an evil character's disability marks them as other and makes them evil, such as Darth Vader. Cosmetic disability, where a character's disability is automatically fixed as if it never had an impact on their life, such as Luke Skywalker's missing hand. Disability helplessness, which is pretty much self-explanatory, such as Tiny Tim from A Christmas Carol. And inspirational disability, which links back to my inspiration porn comment with Forrest Gump. And one-dimensional disability, which disregards intersectionality or the acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination and oppression. These representations do not represent the fullness and the diversity of disabled experiences and can create otherness, which is a topic that I have discussed multiple times in this video. And it just makes it so that disabled people are seen as less human. Next, let's quickly look at some disability representation done wrong, just so I can further explain what I'm trying to get across to y'all. Artie from Glee, a wheelchair user, is used as a comedic pincushion. Sam from Atypical and Sean from The Good Doctor, who are problematic representations of autism. Sia's movie music, which suggests an awful, despicable, restraining technique that has actually killed autistic people before. And the Beast from Split and Glass, who is an incredibly harmful stereotype that paints people with DID as dangerous. I'll also briefly mention here that an issue I've found in a lot of disabled rep is that we are frequently represented as having lost something, or that we are missing out. Of course, there are people who do feel like that, and that is very, very valid. But there needs to be some attention given to the unique ways that we experience our lives and live in our bodies. Okay, so now that I've made you depressed by talking about everything that can go wrong, let's look at some good disability rep in both my eyes and the eyes of others. Most of these characters use their disability as their strength, like Bucky Barnes, an amputee from the Captain America movies, who has a mechanical arm that he uses to fight, but he doesn't wear it constantly, which acknowledges his disability in a positive way by showing that he functions just as well without his arm. The same could be said for Reagan, a deaf character in The Quiet Place, who used her hearing aid to fight against sound-sensitive aliens. I remember as a younger deaf person seeing that and feeling very, very empowered. It's still one of my favorite movies. There is Geordie LaForge, a blind character in the Star Trek movies, and Chief Sousa, a character from Agent Carter, who uses crutches. Both have disabilities that are essentially non-issues. They exist in their space without making their disabilities into their whole identity. Finally, there is Quinny, an autistic character from Heartbreak High, who is an excellent representation of autistic behavior and autism. Her autism is also presented in a positive light, which is rare due to the basic misunderstandings a lot of people have on how autism works. Unfortunately, positive representations of disabled characters are actually pretty rare, which is a genuine issue. Poor representation of any marginalized group, whether it be disability, race, or sexuality, can contribute to the classification of otherness, in which these identities are seen as non-human. Stereotypes within the media, even if they aren't used in like a negative way to hurt people, work to reinforce real-life stereotypes, which can encourage negative attitudes, as well as actual violence and mistreatment against marginalized groups. I feel like we all know this at a basic level, but it is so hard to make people take this seriously. CDS would view this in this way. I'll further explain. This is going to be a short explanation. I won't go further into this concept since I've already explained it a bit previously. But the consequences of poor representation very clearly lead to instances of non-person treatment. When we see treatment normalized in media, we may internalize this and begin to think that this treatment is accessible. We may, for example, see disabled people represented as weak victims and begin to believe that all disabled people are weak and in need of our pity, which is not true. We may begin to villainize disabled people or other them. If we see negative treatment in general, we may think that mistreatment of disabled people is normal and not wrong at all. I personally have noticed that the use of the ableist R slur in media has directly affected the likelihood of abled individuals thinking that this, let me be clear, awful, deplorable word is acceptable and not a big deal. It is desensitizing. These are all examples of the CDS term non-person treatment, as I've mentioned before. Studies have shown that media affects behavior, and this is no different. So overall, I wanted to talk about this because fandom and being a fan in general are a big part of a lot of our lives. Almost everyone is a fan of something. Your dad is probably a fan of a sports team. Your younger sibling probably really likes a YouTuber. Maybe you have an actor that you love and you watch everything that they're in. That's a fandom. You may not be directly involved in writing fan fiction or cosplaying, but you are a part, at least on the outside, on the outer fringes of a fandom. As well as those within fandoms, disabilities are all around us. According to the US Census Bureau, there are about 42.5 million Americans with disabilities, making up 13% of the US civilization. That may not seem like a lot, but there are millions upon millions of us. You probably know someone with a disability, or at least know of someone with a disability. We are whole human beings with our own lives and abilities. We might be your hairdresser, or one of your teachers, or a friend of a friend. I don't want that to sound ominous. I don't want it to seem like we're everywhere, we're gonna take over. But dun dun dun, we are, in fact, everywhere. And we deserve to be treated like humans. Moving on, CDS is important because of this. It helps us to frame disability in a new light that helps us to better understand it. And, like I said in my intro, it is incredibly important to center disabled experiences in the study of disability because we know the most about ourselves. We know our experiences best. The concepts within CDS help to explain behaviors like non-person treatment, uncivil attention, and more. It gives names to these issues so that we can tackle them head-on and spread awareness for disability and disabled individuals. I cannot stress this enough. Listen to disabled people. Listen to what we are trying to say. We are often called snowflakes, like I said earlier, and other derogative terms when we try to express the issues that we have. Do your best to listen to us, as we know what is right or wrong when it comes to our own experiences. This may seem like a lame ending, just me telling you to treat disabled people with the basic respect that every human deserves. But our fight for equality is not over. We may have come leaps and bounds ahead of where we were earlier in life, earlier in time, but it is not over. We should all be treated with basic respect, and we are all still forced to the sidelines, treated poorly, dehumanized, and we are still being treated with less equality than others, with less respect than non-disabled individuals get. Kind of petering out on that word. Non-disabled individuals still use outdated, awful language to refer to us despite our fight against this issue. There are pejorative terms that truly harm the community and make our souls wither when we hear them. We are still mocked, made fun of, and imitated by comedians in harmful caricatures. This is why CDS is so important. As I've said before many times, it centers our experiences and it helps our voice to be heard. Okay, that's all I have for now. Disability issues are so incredibly important, but they don't get nearly as much attention as they deserve. I wanted to point out some issues that are related to disability today, which I hope I have done relatively well. I'm sure only a few people will see this, but I hope that this video will help you to understand these issues a bit better. Sayonara for now, have a great day, and don't forget to take your meds, drink water, and take care of yourself in general. Bye.